Hi, welcome to the video. So today we're going to go over the submissions for the Patreon challenge. I'm going to talk about, what the submissions could have done better, and I'm going to announce the winners. For this one, I really liked all the results, so I'm going to send everybody who put their art into the contest drive here. I'm going to give them basically a shirt, and then I'm going to pick two people, and they'll also get a Corona mask as well. So, yeah, and let's get started. So let's start with this submission here. It's looking really nice. And let's just talk about the things that could be better, what I like about it. Overall, I'm really happy with the presentation. I don't have any major faults with the rendering. I think it looks really nice. I would watch out for maybe having a little bit too much blown out lighting in some places. It might be a good idea to work with raw images or EXR images so that you can, in Photoshop, you can adjust the range so that you're not losing all of this material information due to lighting. So sometimes, it's something to be careful for. In this case, it's pretty aggressive, but it's not bothering me a lot. So, that's a good thing. Overall, I'm really happy with the detailed distribution. I'm happy with the functional elements like this screen here. And, I'm happy that there's some unique shapes and forms. I really like this internal ribbing design. I think it's super unusual. And I like the fact that it's also holding something else. There's a specific function to this object. It's not necessarily something you throw stuff into. It's holding a little exotic particle. So that's really cool. It seems like a very secure device, and it seems very purpose-made. So I really like this design. I don't have a lot of critique on it, to be honest. Some things is just, this little detail here, looks kind of whatever up close. It just looks like something mushy polymodeled really quick. Maybe I don't understand what the purpose of it is, but it's a pretty small thing, but something that still bothers me. I would say the only other feedback I really have is I think that the shapes on the top get a little bit too crazy and a little bit too random. Like just because it's sci-fi, I think be a little bit more purposeful with some of your angles. I think they seem a bit random and they create some little ugly pinches here. But it's nothing egregious. It's not like my eyes are severely bothered. As far as quality, it's pretty high. It would be nice to see, and you could probably do this with a shader. Actually, what? Maybe there are small bevels here, but a lot of this gets very sandwichy. So like one thing that's a problem actually in this area is that there's a lot of sandwiching going on in almost too many layers. So you could simplify this, using materials. So for example, if you had this metal material, maybe go up and around here somehow, that might look a little bit better, just to kind of reduce the amount of layers that you have in this material read. So there's a lot of sandwiching going on here. Overall though, still, happy with a lot of these details and happy with the detailed distribution. Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing you could have put maybe a little bit more work into was just selling this idea. And I mean, this isn't part of the challenge because I don't care about how you render it, honestly. It's not important to me for this challenge. So, but I think if you wanted to push it a little bit further, finding some sort of like textural material or something that really sells this being an exotic material container, I feel like at the moment it's not super clear. So I think that's one thing that you could do to improve it. But yeah, so that's a really small thing. Overall, not much feedback. Yeah, it's looking great. So everybody else watching this video, all of these people's portfolio links will be in the description. I'll have links to the Discord and all of these things so you can join them right away. All right, cool. So let's go to the next submission. And it is by Christian Cuervo, if I said your name correctly. It's looking really cool. It's looking a bit more like Ivan Sanik's work, a bit more manufactured and a bit more realistic. And so that's kind of cool. I really like that it's this unibody shape. So I'm going to talk about some of the stuff I really like on here, and then if I have any feedback, I will give that as well. So my favorite thing, first of all, as far as forms, and everybody knows how much I like unique form ideas. I like that this plane and this plane for the pad is all coming off of the plane for this large bevel. So I like that this is being used and that the details are crossing over the plane change here in the middle. So I like that. I like it when details cross a plane change like this. So I think that looks really cool. The other thing I also quite like is I like that this shape is an X shape. I think that's really cool. And I think it makes it feel a bit more like a product and a little bit less typical than what I would see on, a usual Artstation prop, I think. And I really like this fat bevel here. I always love fat bevels. You did a good job breaking apart the materials to try and emphasize and add layering. And it also looks a bit more realistic. There's a shield and a piece of metal holding that piece of rubber in so that it stays airtight and watertight. As far as feedback, I feel like overall the colors on the renders could maybe be a bit more cohesive. I feel like we've got a few different things going on. We've got a red light. I can try to do a quick correction, but I don't know if I can do it really quick. But yeah, so I think we got kind of a warm red light, and then we have a green screen mixed with a blue. And I think, let's see if I can remove some of the red. I think if you were to have less color in your lighting, I think it would make it feel a bit more cohesive. Yeah, I'm not going to try to correct it really quickly, but I think, yeah, so if you were to maybe mix blue lighting will go, I think, a lot better with the green and the blue combined, or maybe just having neutral lighting like a typical product render. As far as your materials, I think your materials are looking good, but maybe a bit too noisy in some places. Overall, though, the execution, the idea, it's really cool. If I had to have one place I think could look cooler, and I know it looks maybe a little bit less cool because of the manufacturing idea behind it, but I think the handle could be a bit more interesting. And I think overall the design could maybe be less symmetrical on the top and the bottom as far as, placing your details. Pretty much all of these details, if you cut it in half, it feels a little bit symmetrical. So maybe, for example, if you were to add something like here, some sort of detail here, or maybe break the shape of the case following this X shape, you could create some maybe more interesting silhouette and just break up that symmetry just a little bit. And I think maybe having a bit more of an interesting handle. But I think the handle looks realistic and manufactured and not wasteful. So in that regard, it's since your design is so realistic, I can't really fault it for being too realistic. But I think you could still find maybe a more interesting look for that handle and maybe break up a little bit less, a bit more of the symmetrical details. But yeah, overall, really great job. Great job on the presentation, rendering, execution of the idea, and taking an idea all the way, with animation. It's really cool. So great work on that. All right, now let's go to the next one. So this one he has not uploaded to Artstation, so I'm just gonna open that. And it was this design. So this design is looking really interesting to me. There's some places that are a bit noisy, maybe a bit unpolished, but overall, there's a lot of really unique form ideas in here I've never seen before. There's some really cool ideas and also some interesting functional pieces as well. So, this one I'm gonna go over really quickly, but this is pretty cool, and I really am a huge fan. I really, really love this shape here. I love that, first of all, it's tilted, so it's like at an angle, but then this thing is on a different axis, and as a result, you did a really good job of blending these forms together And I love that you echoed the circle design in 3 places, but at different scales. So we have our primary shape, and then we also have our secondary, 2 smaller ones. And I really like that you made all of this design flow together, despite having such complicated forms. It still feels simplified enough that it's not too crazy. I think some of the details are a bit crazy and unpolished, but overall, if I remove all of the details, the forms I think are looking pretty cool. So really, really good job. Honestly, I was really excited when I saw some of these ideas for forms, especially in the Fusion viewport. I think it's looking really good. So yeah, I just like this transitions here. So good job on that a lot. As far as the function, I feel like if the drones echoed this circular shape a bit more, so right now you have 2 drones, and I think it would be a lot better if the drones were, maybe not circular drones, but their overall shape was closer to the circle. So when they came out, it looked like those 2 parts, like the lid and the drone, have a visual relationship. Because right now they feel too separate, I think. Um, I think another thing that would be really helpful for you to work on, I think while you have some really great ideas, and by the way, one more thing I want to mention before I give that critique. I think that it's interesting that the plane change here is at a different angle than the cuts and the insets in the shape. So that's kind of an interesting idea, and it creates a more interesting way for the light to get reflected. That's really cool. I haven't seen that exact detail before. But I feel like overall, you could do a lot better if you held off on detailing, because I see a lot of bevels on shapes that are still pretty simple. I see a lot of very small details, very fine bevels, and also a lot of sharp edges. So first of all, I would try to avoid sharp edges like this as much as possible. They make it feel a little bit less elegant and interesting. I think that having these small bevels too much too early is going to lead to the design feeling unfinished. And so I feel like that here, where you put all of this work into these areas, but then the rest is kind of feels a bit unfinished. And part of it is how you're beveling. So first of all, you have these big shapes and then all of these small little bevels on them. I think if you look at form design, it's you look at yours, for example, you have these big medium forms where stuff is changing, here, here, here. But I feel like these parts are all made to fit together. But when it comes to, the side pieces and then the middle piece, how they're integrated it feels very abrupt. It feels like you didn't finish the outside when I look at it. And so I'd put a little bit more work into your polish. My next feedback is I would also try to distribute your work better. So, like, for example, if you look at the detail level and the polish level of this area versus this area, they're very, very, very different. And I think the front looks unfinished. And I think maybe you didn't finish it yet, but overall, I would put a little bit more work into polishing. So maybe you make a kit bash set to help you add details quickly, or maybe I think you need to first of all be a bit better about your order that you bevel. So big bevels that change the volumes and the forms first, then the small ones. Because I think right now you're jumping into those small volumes too soon, which is something I see all the time. So try to avoid this. I feel like the back too is a little bit too busy. I'm not a fan of all of this modeled in text. It looks a bit too cheesy for me. I think this design will look a lot better if you were to just remove it altogether. It's just too much, and having the color change and the text, there's a lot of things I don't like about that text. Uh, Another possible thing that could help is to just change the proportions just a little bit, because this area, This area, it's not even, but it starts to feel a little bit even. And so I think if you made the latches a little bit thinner, it might be helpful. So for example, if you just made it like something like that, I think it'll be a little bit of a better proportion, at least in my opinion. But yeah, let me do the other side just really quick as well. But yeah, so really good job. Try to hold off on your details and place your details a bit more cleanly across your design. Overall though, really good ideas, unique and interesting, so good job. All right, the next one we're gonna look at is from Stefano, and he's participated in a lot of the other challenges. It's got some really cool stuff, so let's take a look at his submission. All right, so I'm just gonna move this over here. All right, first thing, really, really, really cool. I've very rarely seen forms like this executed in 3D. You have a lot of unique ideas and unique forms, and it's really interesting how you're cutting some of these shapes out. Like, for example, like this piece, how it cuts in, turns into this plane, goes down, and then this plane kind of ends here. I think that's really, really cool. And I see you've done it in a few places, which is interesting as well. You also did it on this side. So you really have a clear understanding of how to transition and work with bevels and plane changes. So, really great job on that. Uh, I love that you also integrated a few tech-looking pieces and this huge curved piece. I think the curved piece is awesome. Um, and I also like that the curve turns into this shape. I think overall, you understand how to use Fusion really well. I think that you have a very, pretty decent grasp on forms, but I think that you could integrate your details a little bit better. Like for example, a lot of your details have kind of erratic placement as far as proportion. Let me just see if I can explain it in a more simple way. So, for example, you see here, this space is larger than this one. And one thing that's really important, I think, when it comes to placing details is trying to be aware of proportions. So, for example, it's kind of like graphic design. Like, there's a lot of graphic design rules. Let me start with that. So, like, for example, a lot of times in graphic design, you want to align edges. So, like, let's say I have like a bunch of text, right? I want the header to be aligned for each section on the same point, here and here. Or, another thing that's very common in graphic design is like, let's say you have a corner, to place something in a way that the border around it, that this one and this one are equal to each other. And so one thing I really think a lot about, like let's say we have some sci-fi shape like we have here. I'm going to paint over it and just explain. But I think that if you work on this a lot, it's going to help your designs to feel much better. Not just you, but pretty much everybody. I think it's one of the most useful things I've worked really hard to try and improve over the last few years. So like, let's say I have a sci-fi detail or just a detail, it doesn't have to be sci-fi. I'm always thinking about the spaces around it and the size of the lines around it. So for example, if we have this here, I'm thinking about this space, this space, this space, this space, and I'm thinking about how the line work will flow around this island of details. So it's like I'm thinking about what shape will make, what placement will make my shape work and look the best. And sometimes it happens in real life where you have stuff with really weird placements, and that's fine. Actually, it's very useful. But I would try to be, doing it when it's on purpose or to make something look real. So for example, here, it's kind of randomly placed. And so I think when you're making human stuff, I'm always talking about 70-30, not making stuff even. But in this case, I feel like it's important to make stuff even in a certain for a certain reason, which is usually to make it feel man-made. Uh, so I mean, it's very rare though that when I'm, giving critique that the person understands enough about shapes and form that I need to start explaining this stuff. So, good job. You had some interesting forms and, you know, overall I think you could model a little bit cleaner, and you need to integrate certain parts a bit better because they feel a bit harshly integrated. Maybe a bit better placement of details with a bit more organization and thought. But overall, I think, you're headed in a really great direction. So this is awesome. I'll just show like a few other pictures really quick. Yeah, great work. Really awesome. All right. So the next one we're gonna be covering is this one. And I'll have his Artstation as well in the description in the video on YouTube and Patreon. All right, so overall, really nice job on the execution. Some unique and interesting ideas here. You put a lot of work into making it animate and such. So it's also kind of interesting because it's a more medical crate. Yeah, so let me get into the critique really quick. All right, so my first critique is I would just be careful when you're doing renders to avoid too much noise. I know that rendering isn't really that important for this competition, but since you did render it, I think that's something that I would work on a bit more. Just avoiding noise and grain in general. It's pretty noticeable in a lot of these images. Second, I think that there's things that you could do to make your forms more interesting. Like I can tell, I remember your previous and actually wait, let me see. Okay, never mind. Sorry, I mixed you with somebody else. All right. So there are a few things I really like. I've never seen details like this before. I've never seen details like this or like this before. So as far as having unique ideas, great job. There are a few places though where I think you could improve, and those are, for example, here. It'd be very difficult to grab this from the handle out because there's nowhere for the fingers to go. So there's this rule in design. If you read a book, I would go check out this book called The Design of Everyday Things. And yeah, so I would get this book, and it's just talking about things like affordances, how people perceive a design when they look at it, what makes a good design. And I think this is one of the most fundamental things. So I would take a look at this book, and I think it'll be really helpful. But yeah, so I would try and place, places for people to put their fingers and to, open stuff. Overall, I think that there's things like the screen could be better as far as your decal placement. Like we were talking about in the last critique, it's more about the positioning. I would definitely try and give it a little buffer of space before you have all of the text, and it'll help it to read a bit more clear. All right, my next critique, I think that you could definitely push the forms a lot more. It seems to me that, you're going into the bevels a bit too early, just like a lot of the other critiques I had. It's very common. So you have some places with some interesting forms and bevels. Oh, by the way, I really like this back grading. I think it's interesting and the shapes are cool. But I think you could do a lot more with your forms and your volumes. So for example, if you were to, let me take this. So if you were to, actually I'll use the painting. All right. If you were to maybe cut into this shape a bit more and then have this bevel going on, you could get a different profile for this design. So the form would kind of, this bevel would like push its shape inwards. That could be really nice. There's really unlimited options, but I think it's about just trying to break this box shape as much as you can. And there's nothing wrong with box shapes, but it's important to learn how to break a box or to make a box shape when you need to, right? Like when it makes sense. Just like evenness. Evenness actually isn't evil, but evenness is like people's default. And you need to learn to only use evenness when it makes sense. A few other things, and this principle could go for almost the rest of the crate. So like for example, if you were to cut out some sort of shape here that had a curve, some sort of bevel, you could break the silhouette a bit more. There's so many things that you could do to break the silhouette and break the forms. You could add some sort of curved pieces here that come off of this plane and, you know, fade into this shape, like blend in. That's just one option. So there's lots of things that you could do to try and make the forms more complex. My next feedback, I would try to avoid too many super harsh angles like this. It tends to make it look very cheesy, and I think they're just too harsh on the eyes, and it makes it feel a bit too easy to model or too maybe amateur. I would try instead to have a few, like if you're gonna have a tight edge, it's fine, but you need to contrast it with maybe one other edge that's smooth. So if this one's smooth and this one's tight, that'll look fine. Or if like this one's smooth and this one's tight, because you're getting a lot more contrast. It's like, the contrast of the smooth versus the tight edge is gonna make it look a lot more polished and interesting. So, but yeah, so my biggest thing I would say for you, focus on your forms first. Don't go into details, don't rush into details. Focus on the volumes and the forms and try and push those to be as good as possible before you add the bevels. Add the bevels only if they change the form and the volume of an object. Add the detail bevels at the very end. And I think you're going to find your designs to be a lot easier to model, quicker to model, and easier to change. And then also better in general because you're able to iterate quickly. So, yeah, that's my feedback. Overall, though, good work. It's looking cool. All right. Let's see. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much everybody. The two people who are going to be getting a mask, I will announce on the Discord channel. And the next challenge is going to be starting up here now, basically. And what we're going to be working on for this next one is Sci-Fi melee weapon. So it's going to be pretty simple. It's has to be a melee weapon. Form factor can be anything: hammer, axe, knife, blade, throwing knife, mech weapon, whatever, as long as it's a melee weapon. Explain its usage visually. You should understand roughly how it works when you look at it, or maybe its scale, right? Like if it's an axe for a mech, then the scale should look very small, like it's a large object. So try really to think hard about how you can sell this. And I'm looking here for unique shapes, forms, and functional ideas as always. Yeah, and so the prize, you're gonna get a Corona mask, a Garuda t-shirt, and an Instagram story shout out. And join the Discord. Link is in the description, and you'll be able to post under the monthly challenges Discord channel. And the contest is going to run for like a month and 5 days, from September 15th to October 25th. And then at the end of it, you need to post your submission in the Google Doc. So, and then I included some references just to get your mind going. Feel free to look at whatever you want, pursue your own styles, go crazy. So, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next month.